Once upon a time, in the heart of a sun-kissed small village in Uriba, an eastern part of Nigeria, a young girl by the name Adana sat outside her father's hut peeling the cassava. She has been bent on finishing the heat that day, so as early as the cock crowed, she got up and began working as usual. Mazi Ibi, her father, has always been so proud of her. He had married her mother, his heart beat immediately after his initiation into manhood, even though he had nothing but one farm. His father, now late, had given to him. Uchechi had worked side by side with him until they made so much money and acquired several landed properties. But then, the issue of childlessness began having its toll on Uchechi as she tears up every night. Her childlessness made the women in the village avoid and insult her, but it didn't make her relent or become soft towards her husband. But when she finally conceived, 6 years later, it came with series of stillbirths which broke his heart. 1 year after she gave birth to a beautiful black baby girl who lived above 3 months. After birthing Adana, Mazi Ibe's wife became seriously sick. It was a trying moment for Mazi. When his wife finally died, he wanted to join her. "Let me join her," he shouted, trying to jump into the cave, but the bearers got him on time. Moving on with his only child was a very difficult task, but he scaled through. At the beginning, he was hating on the child, but now he understands and gave her all his love, even though he wasn't doing financially well anymore after his wife's health took everything. He made sure to provide everything she needed. As Adana worked, a car sped by, but she didn't stare. She only waved away the dust that threatened to blur her vision and continued with what she was doing. Adana didn't know that a car passed because she was both deaf and mute, her eyes speaking volumes that her lips could not. Adana's world was one of gestures, of sunsets reflected in the river. The villagers called him Mzungu, the stranger with skin as pale as the moon. Dr. Richard Harrison, a British doctor, had arrived in their remote corner of Africa to serve the underserved. His mission was noble, but his heart harbored shadows. The villagers are mesmerized by his white skin, strange clothes, the way he speaks through the nose, and especially his strange horse. His car was Adana's fantasy too. The first day she saw it, while passing through to get some vegetables from the compound the white man was staying, she was spellbound and stared at the car in awe. To her, it was an awesome experience. One fateful evening, under the golden hues of the setting sun, Dr. Harrison crossed paths with Adana. Their eyes met. A silent conversation between two souls from different worlds. He tended to her minor wounds, and in that fleeting moment, their lives intertwined. Adana had never known love from the opposite, as she was clearly stigmatized because of her disabilities. But she is ready to make the most of it. Dr. Harrison showered her with love and kindness. He taught her how to use sign language in communication and how to become a confident maiden, even with disabilities, and with time, they both fell in love. Months passed, and Adana's belly swelled. The villagers whispered, their words carried by the wind. The child growing within her was a paradox, a blend of ivory and ebony, a testament to forbidden love. When the day arrived, the village midwife guided Adana through labor pains, and the world held its breath. The baby emerged, her skin as pristine as the morning dew. Her eyes, a shade of azure, held the wisdom of ancient spirits. The villagers gasped. The child bore no resemblance to Adana or anyone they knew. Dr. Harrison stood by, torn between duty and desire. Mazi Ibi was disappointed and didn't want anything to do with the child. How could his daughter mingle with a strange man? To him, he felt that Dr. Harrison took advantage of his daughter's nativity and disabilities. "How dare you?" he shouted at the doctor. "So because you treated me when I was sick, you used my daughter to pay what I owe you. Didn't you say that the treatment was free?" Mazi Ibe was really mad. "I didn't know it would get to this," defended the doctor. "But I don't regret it, sir. My wife has been without a child for 10 years now. This explains that the problem is not with me. So you're married already and you deceived my innocent daughter." "I didn't mean it, Papa. I'm ready to take the child with me back to the States." "Yes, please do." Dr. Harrison approached Adana, his voice gentle yet weighted. "Adana, I'm sorry this happened to you. Please let me take the child back to the States and take care of her," he said gently. Adana shook her head angrily. Her baby was sleeping on her laps. "Don't make me force you," Dr. Harrison threatened, but Adana wouldn't budge. "Take the baby away," he said to the thugs, with him slipping a wad of crumpled bills into Adana's trembling hand. "She belongs elsewhere." Adana clutched her daughter, her heart torn. The money could buy food, shelter, and a future, but it couldn't mend her fractured soul. She shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. The baby was hers, a living testament to love's defiance. She shook her head vehemently in objection, pushing the baby closer to get Blossom. She threw the money away. "Take the money and let her go," shouted Dr. Harrison, forcing the money into her palms, but Adana refused. She held tight to her baby, shaking her head vehemently in objection. Tears streamed down her eyes in torrent. She might not have a voice to speak, but this bundle of joy isn't what she's giving up. Adana clutched her daughter, her heart torn. She was giving her daughter up for anything. Dr. Harrison was disappointed and angry. He went to meet Mazi Ibe. The old man was happy that finally there was a solution to his problems. To him, training a deaf and dumb child was trouble enough, let alone adding another child. "I'll talk to my daughter to let you take the child. The baby deserves a good life too," he promised. Dr. Harrison was happy. He gave the man some money and left with his men. Later that night, Mazi Ibe called Adana to speak with her concerning letting her child go, but Adana didn't want to hear any of that. She shook her head, clutching her suckling baby in her arms. She walked away. Later that night, under the moon's silver gaze, Adana fled. She cradled her daughter, whispering promises to the baobab tree as they headed into the bushes. Its ancient roots seemed to understand, their gnarled fingers reaching out as if to bless the child. Adana vanished into the night, leaving behind a village torn between tradition and compassion. Adana's footsteps traced the dusty trails, her daughter nestled against her chest. She crossed rivers, climbed hills, and sang lullabies in languages only the wind comprehended. The baby, named Nia, meaning purpose, whimpered in her arms, her laughter like rain on parched earth. Dr. Harrison came the next morning to see his daughter, only to find out that Adana had fled. Immediately, he pursued them, driven by guilt and longing. He went with his men, combing the forest and crossing rivers. In the shadow of the baobab tree, he found Adana. She has already built a makeshift hut in the forest. He confronted Adana. "Give her back," he demanded, his voice breaking. But Adana stood firm, her eyes fierce. "She's mine," she declared, speaking for the first time. Doc Harrison was shocked, but not Adana. Lady Night. She had felt something leave her throat after breastfeeding her child, and she has wept all night, wondering why she was given the gift to speak at a time like this. She had seen the shadow of her mother, after which she began coughing. then finally made the first strange sound ever. She could talk. "How was it possible?" asked Doc Harrison. "I don't know," replied Adana, "but I know that I can take care of my own daughter." Dr. Harrison was speechless. For the first time, he felt guilty. He has been wrong all along, trying to deny Amuta Motha her child. "So you won't take this money and let me take Naya back to the States to become a better woman?" "No," replied Adana. "I deserve to be part of her life too," she replied. Dr. Harrison sat down on a stump and waited. Hopefully, she would change her mind. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Adana faced a choice. She could return to the village, accept the money, and fade into obscurity. Or she could defy fate, raise Nia as her own, and let their love rewrite their story. The ancient tree rustled its leaves, its roots embracing mother and child. Adana's tears fell, watering the earth. She whispered, "I choose to love my child." "Then marry me, Adana, please," cried Dr. Harrison. Adana was taken aback. She stared at him in confusion. "Are you sure?" she asked. "I want to show you and my daughter off to my people. Let's get married here and return to my home." "My people will love you." "But you're married," she asked. "She's been barren for 10 years. She will love you and Nia like her own." Adana said nothing. She picked her baby up from where she's sleeping on the bamboo bed and began to walk away. The thugs watched, their hearts torn between judgment and awe. They had followed the doctor to help him to take away the baby from Adana. But now, the story had changed. They were speechless and confused. In the years that followed, Naya grew with Adana, her laughter echoing through the baobab grove. Dr. Harrison had gone back home years ago, alone. He haunted by his choices, thereby he dedicated his life to healing the broken. "Don't take my baby away from me." Adana's silent plea echoed through time in his head. One day he hoped to go back to Africa to see the only woman that made him realize that he was human enough to care about how others felt too. The world indeed doesn't revolve around him.